Just put one for one that's
I mean, it's
That's Santa.
and also some of the situations my doctor in a community chamber example, so maybe.
Yeah.
They need an inspection.
And I'm usually gonna drag.
They're not going to.
Goes up, they're not.
Walk faster than 50,000 hours.
Yeah, that's our vacation. I can't go to the one.
First of all,
Travels.
I mean, I don't think we have a lot of choice.
One in Florida, and it's
Start doing the town.
Ones that say extra slides, not that. Yeah, it's just, those are pockets.
it'll just help, like, if they could.
Grants are temporary.
She'll be a junior this year.
Maybe they could renegotiate their rent.
She's got that.
All right, one more minute, we'll come back together.
And the numbers are wrong.
You're gonna take an extra day.
Really? Had it on. Not him.
Look at that. Sit down.
Additional $771 a month just for Paco. They don't even have enough money to pay what they have.
Sorry, I'm.
So imagine what a transition time financing and budgeting.
All right, guys, we're gonna come back together, and kind of briefly go through, if we have each group, maybe just go through and give a couple of thoughts on what they, want to representative. And, the talking class. And so why don't we start with the group from here in the corner? Amy, do you wanna put you on the spot, but someone from either group wanna kind of give us your thoughts?
Absolutely, thank you. We ended with close the center. But we're trying to come back from that. Rightly, our great Department of Commerce said, are they paying FICA if they're not offering benefits? That's one expense we are adding to and getting deeper in the hole and depressed about. But we talked about cutting the director's salary, cutting the enrollment specialist, renegotiating rent and janitorial, always ensuring all the slots are full. Leaning into other community resources, like do they have the wages program in their county with stipends for twice a year that could suffice or at least carry these teachers over with a commitment to try to get them to 17. in the future. Look at the Child and Adult Food Program, CACFP, which takes its own administrative burden, a lot of hours. And so then if we've cut the enrollment specialist who probably would take that on, that would be difficult. What else, you all? Any other ideas?
I think it's unrealistic to assume that slots are gonna be at capacity 12 months out of the year. There's gonna be those transition times, so to build a budget based on the assumption that the slots are always gonna be full is, in my opinion, erroneous to start with, so.
And we looked at increasing group size if we could. Thank you.
You said pretty much a lot of the same things, with especially the COCFP, like, they're not in food programs, but fundraising, looking to the community, partner preschool to help reduce weight, those things, like food costs and things of that nature, looking if there's any shared services opportunities where they could, basically, they need to increase, like either reduce their expenses or increase, if they do, increase the the tuition, maybe looking at programs like care as I can increase the amount that we're asking because it's gonna be in 3 different groups, helping to pay for the cost of care. So we basically we got 2 in the weeds. We like kind of need to, but like, where's the taxes and where's all this stuff?
It's very similar themes here, and Senator Bergen did add some costs to the
Yeah.
support healthcare
I
for
got
the support
questions.
center right away, and when we looked at the insurance and there are things that we were like, is that enough? And even the
Yeah.
food costs, we're like, is that enough food? But we had same similar solutions, if you will, in terms of setting administrative specialist role. Really, we're trying not to put more burden on the families, really kind of landed on just the center needs more help and where's that help gonna come from? So we started to talk a little bit about subsidies. We didn't unpack that big Rubik's Cube, but I think that there's big differentiation there amongst counties, and so that is an area that policymakers need to.
I want to add something. We were talking about this morning, the staff meeting in my office. We wrote a child care center last week, 117 kids, premium was $6,608. And it's got, all the bells and whistles on it, the physical, sexual and everything. And then when you look, they're talking about $2,400 for however many kids it was, 47 kids. So is that realistic? The 2,400
The
for the insurance.
Oh, no, I mean, don't get caught up in the weeds on some of this is just a high level example of that, but no, and I think we've got another detailed budget that's gonna be shared later today that will kind of get more into detail on that, but no, I can assure you the insurance part is way off.
And then they mentioned the $3 per child per day. That's realistic. I'm getting a number for our jails and prisons in just a minute. See what those are.
Sure, we talked through a number of the same scenarios. We started out by talking about, is there any wiggle room in the classroom sizes to add more students? Talked about that there possibly could be for the infants, but that there are some regulations around the size of the physical space. And then we zeroed in on what expenses could you bring in-house, for example, janitorial services, could that be done by the existing staff and save you some money there? Talked some about, could you get any business or employer sponsorship from the community or from employers? If you have maybe more than one family who comes to the center who works for the same employer, could there be a possibility for a partnership there of some sort? We did talk about the food costs as well, that in some facilities people are asked to bring the food for their child. That could be another place that you could potentially save some money. But again, no good answers. We did also talk about director's costs and could some funds be saved there. It seemed a little out of whack.
We also dug a little bit into eliminating the infant toddler section and talked about doing it either after school slots or picking up preschool at the 8,800.
Okay, so, our first solution was to eliminate the enrollment specialist and give that position, give that responsibility to
the director, bumped the director's pay a little bit by $4,500, and that gave us enough money on the bottom line to get everybody up to $17, and then we figured we would figure out what needed to happen next year when we got there. Well, we talked about prepping the parents for a small increase, a $20 increase per month in tuition, which gives you another little bit on the bottom line to support raises for the next year. And then long term, we thought that this rent seemed a little bit high.
So I think you've gone through kind of an extremely high level, obviously imperfect exercise, but it kind of gives you a flavor for what it's like and kind of thinking about the challenges on a monthly basis for our childcare providers out there. Now, keep in mind, there's some other challenges, within this, and we don't really get into on this, insurance being one. There's so many different insurance policies that you have to have in terms of injury and not alone just the property and casualty and the typical stuff that you would normally have for a business, but also things like molestation, things like child getting injured, a number of other things that kind of come into it. And so there's a ton of different ones that are specialized for childcare, and it's significantly more expensive. And so that may be one thing is legislators, we take a look at it and kind of think about across the board, are there things from a state level that we can do to help from an insurance perspective? Because whether you're a small mom and pop location or a large facility, you're gonna have, a lot of those same concerns. And sometimes the smaller you are, the harder it is to pay for those. The example obviously they gave here with an infant room, a toddler room, and a 4-year-old classroom isn't a typical model. Obviously, you'd want a feeder program into your 4-year-old classroom because the 4-year-olds for most of the nonprofits or the for-profit centers are where you cover most of your costs, where you make your money. So not having 2 and 3-year-olds in the mix obviously is a big impact as well. And that's why you'll see a lot of challenges now in the infant space specifically because a lot of folks have walked away from infant care just because they don't have the specialists to be able to do that. Or they can't incur the additional cost with the limited space that they have. So finding infant care has become harder and harder over the years. And as you mentioned, the director there working, making a decent salary, but at the same time, most centers are open 12 hours a day, or 10 to 12 hours a day at least. And so, I mean, you're talking about somebody possibly working, a minimum 60 hours a week, coming in as a director. And so that, in certain circumstances, that's probably already happening, but they're also the one that has to go into a classroom and a teacher's out or something. So they're already wearing multiple hats, doing multiple jobs. And so it really gets stressful on a daily basis. And if you're not comfortable kind of living in that chaos of day-to-day operation, then it can really be, it can really be tiresome. I think it's a good exercise at a high level, and we can continue to discuss the details.
Beth, do you have something else to share?
Just the one thing I wanted to add is that I keep thinking about the margin is so small. It's so small. Like it's a disincentive to go into it, but also if there's one emergency, like we talk about one emergency wiping a family out, it seems very possible that one emergency could wipe the center out too and create that ripple effect through all those families.
Yeah, when you're talking about childcare, and I think this is the thing that a lot of people don't think about, when you think about businesses in general, you can sell more product or more services or build more widgets. With childcare, once those seats are full, you're full. And you can't just, the only lever you have are cost or tuition. And we're at a kind of a breaking point of both of those. And so what's left? And how do we get creative? And that's the challenge that we have before us.
Right, any members have anything else to add? I found this very valuable, also depressing. Glad I'm not doing this early. All right, we are going to head into our next which is a presentation on why childcare business margins are slim, which we just saw in real life. It's Neil Harrington and Leanna Martin. So welcome Neil and Leanna of North Carolina Child. They've agreed to share a presentation of new research on why the childcare business model is so challenging for our state's many childcare operators. Welcome Neil and Leanna.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Hunt. Good morning. I'm Neil Harrington, the Research Director at NC Child. We might make you more depressed than we were after doing that. So hopefully not too much, but we'll try not to. So I'm Neil Harrington, the Research Director, joined by our excellent early childhood education policy analyst, Leanna Martin. We're excited to be here today. Thanks for having us. We're going to talk a little bit about some research that we've been doing at NC Child around childcare providers' budgets and really trying to understand the costs they face versus the revenue that they bring. Oh, wrong way. There we go. So right, as all of you know, as you've learned through this task force and new coming in, North Carolina's childcare system is kind of rife with access and affordability issues. And both of these, both access and affordability, are directly related to the budgets that providers operate with. The revenue they bring in determines how many people, how many kids they can serve, what they can pay their staff, how many staff they can hire, and ultimately the number of children that they can serve in their facility. If they want to serve more families, right, providers have to often turn to pay increases to bring in more revenue to be able to expand operations because, like Representative Willis said, they're often operating at full capacity already. So we really kind of set out to understand this by talking to providers and asking them to share with us the budgets that they operate with, the expenses they have versus the revenue they bring in, which has really kind of allowed us to understand the economic decisions that providers kind of faced with and the delicate balance they have to strike between setting prices, serving families to maintain services, while trying not to price parents out of the childcare market.
And what we all understand is while we look at the numbers and we look at the budgets, there are humans behind those stories. And so really understanding those provider experiences on how do they balance? What happens if in 1 month they go into the red? What happens if they have an unexpected expense? And just really understanding what that looks like. And so we have been completing interviews and we are continuing to complete interviews now to better understand those personal experiences from the providers. And so from this, when we were asking about revenue, there were 4 main categories in which we had our revenue streams: private paying parent tuition, subsidy payments for many of our providers, the child and adult care food program. So y'all were talking about the food program just a minute ago, talking about the food program, and then grants and miscellaneous income. So as we've been talking with providers, understanding that stabilization grants just ended, what was that like to have those programs? What is it to have philanthropic funding, grant streams, and then also vendor payments? Understanding that some of our providers can offer activities such as dance, gymnastics, swimming, and summer programs. And while those vendor payments are beneficial, they are not significant or substantial relative to the cost of care.
Yeah, so what do these income sheets kind of look like in practice? So we have 3 providers that we're going to come back to and look at their expenses and their profit margins that really kind of represent a good idea of what the typical childcare provider in North Carolina faces. So a 5-star for-profit center based in Mecklenburg County brings about 98% of their income in through tuition. And they don't have any children that are receiving childcare subsidies in their program. So all 98% of that tuition is paid for by private parents. As you can kind of see on the slide, you can make out the numbers there. As Representative Willis was saying, right, the most profitable spots are those 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old slots. And that's where they get about 50% of their revenue. As Leanna mentioned, right, extracurricular programs like offering dance or gym or soccer at a childcare center offered through a third-party vendor. Some providers bring in revenue through that mechanism as well, but as you can see on the slide, that's only about 1% of the total revenue that they bring in a given year. So we also talked to a 5-star center in Alamance County that's based at a church. They also bring in most of their revenue from private paying parents. About 88% of their revenue comes from private paying parents, but they serve children with state subsidies and bring in about 10% of their total revenue in a year from state subsidy reimbursements. They also serve enough low-income families to be able to qualify for child and adult care food program payments, the federal food program, and but that only represents about 3% of the total income they bring in a year. So for family childcare home providers, right, revenue streams can look a little different than from centers. They still rely primarily on private paying parents. They bring in about 66% of their revenue from private paying parents, but about 15 to 16% of their annual revenue comes from tuition payments, and about 18% is from the federal food assistance program.
And so with that, what our providers made it very clear to us is that tuition does not cover the true cost of care. But there's this balancing act of how much can we raise the rates without breaking the budgets of the families we're serving. And so this provider made it very clear that they play this puzzle, they play this budget game monthly, sometimes weekly, if an unexpected expense arise daily, to see what types of funding they can find so that they can at least break even. Not even thinking about profit margins just yet, but at least breaking even. And so going on with that, then we now have the four main categories of provider expenses, and starting with staff expenses. Staff expenses traditionally make up 55 to around 80%, depending on what the staff is offered. Benefits are not a guarantee in early childhood education. 55% of those overall expenses. And then training. Our early childhood, early care and education providers are expected to go through continuing education courses. Sometimes those are provided, and sometimes the facilities have to pay for those. And so that professional development expense is also in there. Going on to program expenses, we talked about the food and nutrition program, which is an incredible resource, but it does not overwhelmingly cover the cost of food programming. Many of our providers said that they are still having to pay around 50% or more on top of what they are receiving in reimbursements. And if for some reason, if our directors are really busy and maybe their paperwork is a day or two late, they have to wait a couple months to receive that money, that reimbursement. So they're having to eat those costs on already razor thin margins. And then facility expenses, rent and mortgage. Understand that family childcare homes have that mortgage component, and that makes up a majority of their expenses. Utilities, facility maintenance. I know a group was talking about just a minute ago, bringing the janitorial staff in-house. But knowing that sometimes it's part of their licensing requirements is to have that professional cleaning service. Having these little things really adds up, so they can only take in so much of those janitorial services. And then finally, as we all have already talked about, insurance, workers' compensation, liability, legal and accounting services make up an incredible amount for our childcare providers.
Yeah, so as Leanna said, right, staff expenses, wages, benefits, and things like that make up the largest share of childcare providers' expenses by far, especially for center-based providers. For the two providers, the center-based providers we showed revenues for earlier in Mecklenburg County, staff expenses represent about 55.5% of their total revenue for this building. For the Alamance provider we talked to, that's up to about 84% of their total revenue. The next biggest kind of budget item for center-based providers is typically the facility costs. So you can see the Mecklenburg County provider that we talked to, they pay about 21% of their total revenue in a year from this building, paying for their facility costs. About half of that alone is just rent payments. So this building costs about $500,000 in rent per year. In Alamance County, like I mentioned, they're a church-based provider, so the church that they're affiliated with provides their physical space for them, so they don't have as much facility costs, only about 5% of their total revenue in this budget year. And they're really able to kind of put that money back into staff expenses, right? Which is why they're paying about 84% of their revenue in staff expenses. But and that's not a given in childcare to have a lot of money into staff expenses like that. And this provider actually uses it to pay for 100% employer-sponsored health insurance, which is also quite rare in childcare. But even though they're offering that benefit that really kind of sets them apart from their competitors in the area, this provider still struggles with teacher shortages and hiring and retaining staff, just as every other childcare provider in the state really does. They actually have upwards of 6 classrooms that are empty right now because they can't hire staff to work them and make them actually operational. For family childcare homes, right, they don't typically have staff expenses because it's typically a sole proprietor, one person working in the program. So they're spending most, if not all, of their revenue on operational costs. So this Cleveland County Family Childcare Home Provider does spend all and actually a little bit more than what they're bringing in a given year, just providing services to families.
And so as we've talked about, staff expenses, this is just kind of a large scale of who we've spoken with some so far and their budgets. As you can see, 84 to 52%, the overwhelming majority of the expenses goes to staff. However, staff are still, as we've discussed, as we've talked about in depth, are still not being compensated nearly to the level of other big box chains and other large scale retail. And so where that comes in is average hourly wage for childcare providers in North Carolina is $14.26, according to the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment out of UC Berkeley. The early childhood sector childcare workers make less than 97% of all other professions in the United States. And what that translates to is, according to the 2023 workforce study from early years, 39% of early childhood workers were looking to leave the profession. And where that translates to nationally is it aligns perfectly. Turnover rates in early childhood education are 65% higher nationwide than all other professions. And so when I asked a provider, how do wage supplements and bonuses and benefits really impact your teachers? And they made it very clear that our providers are not taking bonuses and taking them and spending them on elaborate trips. They're not creating savings accounts. They're paying their bills. They are taking that money and taking it to maybe catch up on a bill or stay afloat. They are not looking at this money as anything other than an additional means of survival. And so when we think about these wage supplements, such as wages, such as stabilization grants, such as other programs that we have had, they're really there to help keep the sector afloat. And again, as our provider said, they don't make enough to put money in the bank. They're simply paying their bills.
Yeah, so the last big thing we wanted to share, right? We took the expenses and revenues that providers gave to us and calculated profit margins for each of the providers that we talked to. So among the 3 providers that we've showed revenue and expenses for, profit margins range from about negative 0.7% to about 14%. So what's kind of considered a good profit margin in business will vary depending on what industry you're operating in. But across all industries, generally 20% is considered kind of a good, healthy profit margin. 10% is about average, and 5% or under is considered low. So the highest one on this slide here, right, the 14% in Mecklenburg, it's between an average and good profit margin there. But this provider also has business training, right, which really kind of enables that stronger profit margin and speaks to the importance of kind of apprenticeships and other business training programs for folks that are coming into this business to be able to run healthy businesses. They do raise rates for parents when they can, just like every provider does, given they're a for-profit business. But they do so in kind of responsible ways, right? That really rely on metrics like enrollment rates and a pressure-tested wait list that shows them that the market can bear that price increase, and it's not going to have a detrimental impact on their enrollment and into their ability to serve families. So the Alamance County provider that we talked to, like I mentioned, they're religiously affiliated, so they don't actually aim for a profit margin at all. They spend all the money that they're bringing in a given year providing those services to families. And the family childcare home provider in Cleveland County, They, like I said, they mentioned they spend all of their money on operational costs. And when you factor in the health insurance costs for the sole proprietor that runs the business, they take out of their business expenses, they're actually dipping into the red, and they run about a negative $250 deficit over the budget year. So, some other family childcare home providers that we've talked to, they do have leftover expenses after they pay their operational costs. But that money is usually just the income that they're bringing home, right? Because they're the only employee there. So what they have after paying operational costs is typically their wage. So Mecklenburg, 5-star family childcare home provider that we talked to, they earn about $29,500 after you take out operating expenses, which at face value, right, looks like a 37% profit margin. But if they were a center-based provider, you would count that on the staff expenses side of their budget sheet, which would basically be an effective 0% profit margin. My circle there is actually supposed to be over the estimated wage level, but right, this provider also receives childcare stabilization grants and wages, the education-based supplement for childcare workers in North Carolina. So with those state support programs, this provider is earning about $14 per hour if they're working 40 hours per week. We know that stabilization grants expired, right? So without that, this family childcare home provider will receive about $9,000 less than what they did the most recent budget year, which would bring their hourly wage down to about $10. If you took out the wages money they receive, that's about $5,000 a year. They're only taking home about $16,000, and their effective hourly wage rate was about $7.65 per hour, less than 50 cents higher than the federal minimum wage. These programs really allowed them to earn a lot more money. And in an interview that we had with this provider, they said that they even have a second job, right? And because they can't survive on just the money they make from the family childcare home provider. And without that second job, they would basically be on every public assistance program that they qualify for and could receive benefits through. So across all providers that we've spoken to, the average profit margin was about 6%. So right, just below an average profit margin across all businesses, and just at that threshold of what's considered kind of a low profit margin. This Orange County provider that we spoke with, they have about a 17% profit margin, but they've been in this business for a long time, and they know what they kind of need to bring in and the level of service they can provide to enable a stronger profit margin like this. And they're not serving as many families as they would necessarily like to. A Wake County provider that we spoke with, center-based provider, they have about an 8% profit margin. Like the Mecklenburg County provider we talked to, they also have business training. And they want to access private capital to be able to build a new building right next to the classroom they currently have. But the bank has told them that with the profit margin they operate with, they're not going to give that loan to them because they don't really trust that they can be able to pay it back. A Buncombe County provider we talked to, they're also not-for-profit, and they're spending all the money that they're bringing in just providing services to families.
And so as we were wrapping up our conversations, I was asking providers, what happens you end up in the red? And one of our providers, when they had shared their budget, were actually operating in the red for the first quarter of the year. And so I asked them, how do you make up that money in the next month? And her comment was very, very poignant and very stark. They have to adjust where they can, and made it clear that sometimes they look at the menu and what is the least expensive meal they can provide. And we went through what those meals are. And I remember my first job as a childcare floater when I was 18, serving those meals quite often. I had no idea about the revenue and the expenses. I was 18 years old. But understanding, this is how many times can they put that on the menu without parents starting to question things? And that's how they have to make up some of that funding. And so when even trying to break even is really difficult. And this is sometimes where they have to find that funding. She went on to say, I would love to serve fresh fruit and vegetables, but I don't receive the reimbursement in order to do so. And that's an expense I just can't afford.
Yeah, so, beyond balancing, just kind of the day-to-day when you're slipping into the red, the most consistent kind of balancing act that childcare providers have to strike is with tuition pricing, right? Really trying to understand what they can price their services out at without pricing parents out of the market. Because any increase in tuition prices, right, is going to make childcare even more unaffordable, and some families just aren't going to be able to afford that. So we already know that, childcare is extremely expensive in North Carolina. Center-based care for infants is about $13,400 on average. For toddlers, about $12,600 on average. My wife and I just had we have a 4.5-month-old baby at home, and she'll start childcare in August. And in Durham, we'll be paying about $24,000 for the center that we go to. So it can be a lot higher depending on where you're living in the state. And it shares a median income, right? Center-based care for infants and for toddler cares. It represents about 12% of the median income of a married couple in North Carolina, about a quarter of the income of a median income of a single dad, and about 40% of the median income of a single mom in the state. And for context, right, is a line that all of you have heard many times before. Both those price points are more expensive than the cost of in-state tuition at UNC Chapel Hill in the most recent academic year. So it's gotten more expensive, right, to pay for childcare in those first critical years of a kid's life than it is to pay for college tuition at one of the best schools in the state and the country. I went to Duke for grad school, so I struggle to call Carolina one of the best schools in the state and country. So I think there's a better one 10 to 15 miles down the road. But it's true, right? In families, they typically have 18 years to save for their kids' college education, and they can take out loans to do so. You can't take out loans to pay for your kids' childcare, and not many families can save that money to actually afford it. Providers, right, they're kind of left with this balancing act that they have to try to understand what markets will bear, that they can set the price of their services at, while often understanding the price that they can set that markets will bear is not going to cover the full cost of providing that care to kids, which really constrains the quantity of services that they're actually able to provide in their communities.
And so what's next? This is the beginning of a summer project that we are working on to produce a full qualitative report. So for the next month, we're continuing interviews with providers. And we ask that, if you know someone that would love to speak with us, please reach out. We would love to have a variety of perspectives on this, knowing that childcare is very complex and nuanced, and struggles may look different, but continue to provide continued challenges for our providers with a full qualitative report in early August. And so from there, we would love to open it up for some Q&A, but thank y'all for allowing us to be here. Any questions for them?
Very good information. Thank you all. Look forward to that report in August. All right, if not, we are taking a 10-minute break. Everyone.
Kaylee, can you?
Yes, I have you.
Okay, we can see you as well.
Okay, great.
I think we're good. We'll put you on, we'll put everything on mute, and when we come back to the panel, you'll be up on the screen for you to see. Can you see the room?
I can now.
I'm sorry.
I cannot see the.
Okay, got it. We'll get that figured out for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
that, I'm happy to introduce our next guest. Annette Anderson Samuels, the owner of Phenomenal Kids Childcare. Sarah Crawford, Executive Director of TLC here in Lake County. Haley Hartley, Owner Director of Kid Cove in Watauga County. Oh, wait, no, Haley Hartley's online. Yes. Okay. Also, I'd like to welcome David Ferris, President and CEO of the Rocky Mount Area Chamber of Commerce, to facilitate this conversation. Welcome. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor and Senator Bergen and your panel. We greatly appreciate the interest and the involvement that you're putting in this, what I would consider being from the Chamber of Commerce, a pressing workforce issue. And we do thank you. We know hundreds of people in our state who operate child care centers. And they aren't just providers, they're not just educators, although that's a mainstay of what they're there for. They're also business people like most of us are. They're contending with real challenges that small businesses deal with every day, except one primary difference. They're dealing with a badly broken industry. This isn't something most folks walk into because they think they can earn a great deal of wealth. They do it because of its purpose and the need that we all have. But today we want to look a little closer at why this business model is so challenging for the people who choose to work in it, the unique cost and expenses that child care business owners have to worry about, and any possible opportunities to help. Lieutenant Governor Hunt has introduced our panel, and there's one little thing I can't resist, Representative Crawford. Her business is referred to as TLC, and most of us think of TLC as Tender Loving Care, and I'm sure that goes into yours, but it's the Tammy Lynn Center. But I think that's probably a nice blend. I'm gonna open internet with you. Annette, your business is a licensed 4-star family child care center, and congratulations. That's a whole lot easier said than done. I understand you've also got a bank background.
Yes, sir.
Talk about the financial process you had to go in starting your business.
I actually started my business, I was still working at Wells Fargo Bank. I had been there for 21 years. And I just decided one day, I was like, it's sink or swim. I wanted to do it. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a school teacher, but I did not go that way. I went into banking and I enjoyed what I did. I went to speak with Tina Williams with Child Care Connections of Cleveland County to find out what I needed to do to get started. So she gave me a booklet. She told me just to go through this. I ended up speaking with Rebecca Hammond, who also gave me some details of things I needed to do. So while working at Wells Fargo, I was making preparations to get out of Wells Fargo. And I think the main thing that I had that dealing with the financial piece of getting started, I had to purchase a fence around my property. I live in rural Cleveland County. However, I live in a development and it's on a busy road that gives access to 85 via Highway 29 and also 74. I'm dead center of that road. Like it's a 3-mile road, dead center in a development. My house is right on the main road. 18-wheeler always, all day trafficking. So I had to put a fence up, which was very expensive. But I was like, okay, I can do that. I also had to change all my interior locks, my door knobs to, you know how we have the door knob just has a little hole. I had to change all of them to exterior locks. So I have a string of keys in my purse right now that locks every door in my house. I mean, seriously. And of course, and if I don't have those doors locked when state consultants come, I get violation because there are things that are behind those doors that could actually be potential harmful to the children. I had to add a fence, a gate to go down into my yard so that the kids can't come back up once we go out to play. I mean, it's just a lot of things that I had to do that I did not realize I was gonna have to do, but I did it anyway. mind you, I was still working at Wells Fargo, so I had a pretty good income. You know, I was married at the time and he had a pretty good income too. And so we were able to do it. Of course, once I stopped working, I was like, oh, heck. Oh, wow. But because of my heart, I wanted to make this happen. I love kids and y'all, I never was able to have children of my own. However, God blessed me to adopt a brother and sister who are 1 and 2, who will be my Gotcha Day kids on June 18th, 15 years. So I'm excited. I am a mother. Thank you. I am a mother. They worry me too, but because they're a big financial part of my life right now, being teenagers. But the financial piece, though, it's more than what y'all think. And when you say I'm everything at my program, because I'm a family child care program, and I don't know if it was you or the lady that was sitting on the other side of Ashton. No, that was you. But to say a director's cost can be deducted by $4,500 and give that money to somewhere else, to help, to have, it's impossible. Because you wouldn't want to go to your job and they tell you in a meeting to say, okay, well, we're gonna cut your pay $4,500 for the year so we can disperse this money to have more office activities or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So once you're used to a lifestyle, once you have that money in place, you gotta put it somewhere and you know where it's going. And if it's gonna be cut from you to put it somewhere else, then your whole life gets messed up. So, I mean, and I don't know where everybody is, and I think I might be going too far, but this is personal to me. But I don't know where everybody else is, grandmothers are 35 years old now. So grandmothers can't keep kids because they're working, you know what I'm saying? Some of them are 40, they can't keep their grandkids. You know what I'm saying? Even great grandmothers are like 49, you know what I'm saying? So it's impossible for these people to keep their own kids at home while their children go to work. So there has to be care for them. And if there's not early care for these kids, then what? People can't go to work. Then our economy starts to get messed up. Because one person can't do everything. We all work together to make this whole country run the way it's supposed to go. So, but financially, there were some expenses that did occur that I did not think would happen. But I fared through it and I'm still, and I'm one of those people who works 2 jobs other than the Phenomenal Kids job. And fortunately, there are jobs that I can work via internet, through Zoom and different things like that. But I'm making it happen because I got 2 kids of my own that I got to take care of. So if that satisfied your question.
It does. It does. Speaking of Zooms, through the miracle of Zoom, Haley, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I have you.
Okay. Thank you for being with us this morning. And your business, Kid Cove, is an exciting small business, and you have several locations. We know you and your community have weathered major challenges related to the disaster recovery from Hurricane Helene, and some of us who've suffered through catastrophic storms in Rocky Mount Floyd, it's hard to recover. At the time, I was in the automobile business and people had to replace the cars. But when jobs were closed because of the storm, that has to impact your business, which is already a challenging industry. Tell us how you've managed to grow your childcare business over the years and the financial challenges, and particularly with the times that you're going through now.
Yeah, so David, thank you so much for bringing up the challenge of not only is it already a hard business model to follow, but also now that we have this added challenge of Hurricane Helene recovery, kind of adds on this new layer of hard business and recover from this while growing a childcare facility. So I own 3 childcare facilities in Boone, North Carolina. Number 4 should be opening around August, if not a little bit sooner. And so, pre we were operating on 5% profit margin, which I appreciate the presentation before this because it really outlined very well our profit margin. And while there is a margin between the 0.7% and 14%, as they were saying, it's still lower than what an average other industry would make. And so there's always financial strain in childcare. And so the way that I have been able to grow this business so much over the past few years is we have such a need in Watauga County, as in other counties in North Carolina. But just like the passion behind childcare is first and foremost, the need for childcare first and foremost. And so where there's a will, there's a way is what I go for. I have tapped into private capital, private investments. We operate a very large sum for schooling children, and that quote unquote our savings account for the year. And so able to use those funds for unexpected expenses like hurricane relief, or if our heat system goes out, or if we need new toys. I mean, children are very hard on material toys, and we have to replace them quite often. You know, and that's also a state requirement as well. If we want to get higher star ratings, we have to have good quality products. And if you have ever opened up a magazine with childcare equipment in it, it is not cheap. A diaper changing table, $3,000. And so to put that in a business that is already strapped financially is very hard. But, you know, back to the financial ability, I have really just become creative in the ways that, hey, to a certain landlord, can you work with rent while the facility up and running? Because this is what is projected to come in. Or I will go to a private investor and say, I need this much money to start this new business because we lack 100 spaces of childcare in Watauga County. And it is without a doubt my passion to continue to expand and to grow. Like Annette, I also work a second job. I manage rental properties in Watauga County. So that is the pay the bills income so that I can continue to expand Cove.
Haley, I don't know how in the world you do it. I've got to ask a question that's probably on everybody's minds. Because I looked across the room and Lieutenant Governor Hunt was just shaking her head. What in the wide world of sports constitutes a $3,000 diaper changing table?
They are that expensive.
What do they do? Do they paddle the child and change it?
So on the outfit one toddler class, $8,000.
And 3 of that is the table.
Table, yes.
Thank you, and I so admire y'all. You're doing an incredible job, and to be able to expand, especially in the part of the state that is still suffering. Congratulations. We appreciate it. Representative Crawford, you work a couple of jobs too.
I do. I wear a couple hats, yeah.
You do. I think it takes that. You sort of have a unique type of childcare operation, I think.
Used to.
Used to.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell us about it.
Yeah. So my other job that I lovingly refer to as my day job, I'm CEO at TLC, as you heard, Tammy Lynn Center for Developmental Disabilities, and we provide an array of services. Many of you know of us or have heard of us in the room. An array of services primarily for children and adults with special needs. And we used to have a childcare setting. We had 2 classrooms that served pre-K kids, and then we had 4 classrooms that were K through 12. So we had several things going on. All of that is now different for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into. But we actually started our educational services in 1979 for our residents who lived with us, who were under 22 who were still in school. And then in 2017, we opened our first pre-K program. So we served children in our pre-K program that were both with and without disabilities. We had NC pre-K and we had IEP kiddos with an individualized education plan, and we provided the related services. And we had, like I said, 2 classrooms of that, but we also had this K through 12 program developmental day that we contracted with Wake County Public Schools to provide. So I know we'll talk a little bit about funding and some follow-up questions, but one of the things that really made our program possible is the concept of blended funding, because the developmental day rate, it's been raised since, but the developmental day rate had kind of been the same for a long time, and it was $999 per kiddo, and that had to include not only all of this equipment, but it also had to include your related services, so OT, PT, speech, language, nursing services if the kiddo had nursing in their IEP. Yes, it's crazy, Beth. It is crazy.
I had a child with early intervention. That doesn't cover anything.
Yeah, it doesn't cover anything. And so we were very fortunate through our Wake County contract for K through 12. Wake County gave us an additional $200,000 a year on our contract in addition to the developmental day rate, so that we could cover additional services. And it was worth it at that time for Wake County Public Schools to do that. In 2021, through a variety of factors, we just had a lot more kids that were going into the public school system. Wake County was able to serve them differently than they had in the past. And so Wake County did not want to pay that $200,000 extra anymore. And so we could not offer developmental day K through 12 anymore. And so without that $200,000, which really covered the bulk of the nursing costs for our kids and some of the administrative overhead. And when that went away, it made it really, really challenging to keep our pre-K classroom open with pay that was competitive. And so in 2023, we had some staffing changes. We were a five-star facility. So we had a BK certified teacher in there. That person left for a job making more money, and we were hard pressed to find a new BK certified teacher. I even called my retired mother, who was once upon a time licensed to be BK, and I was like, "Hey Mom, what would it take for you to renew your license?" She thought about it for 2 seconds and she's like, "Absolutely not. I don't know what you're going to get me into, but that sounds terrible." But we she paid her dues. She was a school teacher for a long time. She's like, "I'm done. It's somebody else's job now." But we kind of, for several weeks, we tried to keep the program going. We were trying to recruit. We just could not offer the kind of pay that was required to recruit that position, and eventually had to decide to also close our pre-K program. And we did it gradually so that, all of those kiddos, we worked with Wake County Smart Start. We worked with Wake County Public Schools to make sure that all those kiddos got placed successfully, but we could not provide the kind of childcare environment that we knew those kids deserved. And so we ended up having to close that program.
Incredible. Childcare business is a lot more complex than most any other industry out there, because the revenue, one reason, which we'll talk about in just a second, the revenue isn't always as simple as collecting the money from the parents or other customers. Some childcare businesses interact with other streams of revenue, like subsidy reimbursement. And I'm sure that takes a lot of time once you apply for it. Representative Crawford, I know TLC must also interact with federal dollars as well as philanthropic support. Could each of you talk a little bit about your interaction with other sources of funding and how that may affect your organization's budgets? Haley, you want to start?
Sure. So as far as streamlined sources of funding, there are very few far between. That is just a very honest interpretation of childcare funding. yes, we do get subsidy reimbursement. But granted, it is not at what it could be. It does not cover full true cost of childcare. We do have various grants we can apply for, but they're not, consistent. I would say we do have a partnership with our local Children's Council, which is a part of the Smart Start network in North Carolina. And if we go through a program called Pathways to Accreditation with them for 2 years, we are enrolled in a dual subsidy program where they pay a certain amount to the center each month to help cover extra expenses like a lead teacher's salary or equipment in classrooms. It is a very small monthly amount, but it is streamlined. It is very consistent. It is monthly, and so that is something that we use as well.
And mine's very simple. It's the subsidy that the state offers and also the food program. Now, during the time that they were giving the stabilization grant, it was like phenomenal because I was able to pay my debts off and and some of the other things that I had to do at the time. I was also able during that time to offer scholarships to parents that could not pay, they were getting back in the workforce and they could not pay their tuition at the time. But as far as having any other streams other than me working some additional jobs, I don't have any other streams of income.
Our budget at TLC is pretty complex. We have a lot of different streams of funding. I already mentioned subsidy. I mentioned the developmental day rate. We also we're a nonprofit, so we also raise money. So most of our equipment, assistive technology, all of that came because of philanthropic dollars that we raise, grants. We also do get a grant from the city of Raleigh that allows us to provide services, early education services directly to city of Raleigh kids. Like Annette said, offering scholarships to those families through that grant funding. But that's money that we have to apply for every year and just, cross our fingers and hope that we get. And we do still provide early education services. It's just not in the form of a childcare setting anymore.
Are all of your financial models based on the calendar or fiscal?
We're fiscal year July to June.
Haley, what are you, calendar or fiscal?
We are calendar as well.
I would think that would make it even more difficult if governmental dollars are entering into their budgets running different timeline than calendar year. For those of you who serve students who are on a subsidy, can you talk about the difference in revenue there and if so, how are businesses getting by with less revenue in order to serve the children through the child care subsidy system at current reimbursement rates?
Well, currently, I only have one student that is on subsidy. And the challenge that I've had with that is that the state is only going to give a certain amount for my county. And the weird thing is I'm only 5 miles from Gaston County, which is right there. I mean, the part of Kings Mountain where I live is in Gaston County. And they get almost $100 more in subsidy and reimbursement than I do.
Let me interrupt you for a second. How does the subsidy rate on a given year compare to what a parent would pay?
Well,
I didn't have to have any, I could walk in.
At one time, they were getting 100% during the COVID time, they were getting 100%. But what the parent gets from the state, they have to pay a parent fee, which would be the difference, which to me, I charge a $700 fee tuition, okay? So if they're only getting $400, the parent still has to give me $300. And there have been parents that have went back and forth with me and I'm like, well, fine. You have to find a facility that'll just take that because I don't just take that. Everybody's gonna pay the same thing because I gotta live too, and I only can take 5 kids, so I can't even offer a sibling discount. I can't do it, but yeah, so I mean, it's really crazy how they got it set up, being that close to the next county and that part of the county gets almost $100 more in. And then we walk over into Mecklenburg County, it's almost $200 more. for a four-star facility for a child of that same age. It's really kind of,
Haley, how does that work with you?
Like Annette is saying, they only cover a certain amount in Watauga County, and we are one of the lowest rates across North Carolina. And I still have to charge a fee on top of what subsidy is covering because we have tuition rates that have to be met, and those cover the bills. It breaks my heart for certain families because I know that they have applied for subsidy because they need the full amount covered. But then they still have a $300 fee on top of that. And a lot of times you'll find me just saying, don't worry about it this month. Don't worry about it. But after a few months, I realized from a business, not very smart. But it also kind of goes back to the full circle of if they don't have childcare to work, then they don't have the income themselves either. Yeah, so the subsidy is definitely a tricky subject, as many know in this room. I know Heiss is in the room, and I know he is a huge champion for our subsidy floor rate being raised. And for example, in Watauga County, if it were raised across North Carolina, Watauga County would receive over $700 more per month per infant. And that would be, I cannot even put into words how amazing that would be for a childcare business and what I would be able to do next.
Okay, Representative Crawford, anything to add to that?
No. I know we're pressed for time.
We are. We'll treat this one as a lightning round. One quick, you want, leaving this group, the final thought. What would it be?
So I have two final thoughts. One, and I think everybody in this room feels this way, is that childcare, early education is a core infrastructure for our communities and for our state. And we really cannot treat it any differently for all of the reasons that what Annette said about if these kids don't have a place to go, their parents can't go to work, and it fuels our economy. And so that is just, it's core infrastructure. We're asking providers to really shoulder the burden of a system that is not working, or it's just really hard to make ends meet. Both of these women work other jobs. That's wild to me. That's wild. The other thing that I'll say is, in this conversation, we cannot forget about the children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because their needs are that and plus. And so we just have to make sure that when we're thinking about this system, that we also include the funds that are needed to support their needs and to support their IEPs, because when we do that, they are much more likely to matriculate into school, matriculate into work, into college, and really set them up for success. For every dollar that we invest, it's probably more now, but we used to say for every dollar we invest, we save 7 in the future. And it's probably, that's a few years old. So we just can't forget about those kids.
that's right.
Anita, briefly.
Just like she said, we can't forget about the children. The name of my program is Phenomenal Kids, and I'm telling you, I've had some phenomenal kids leave my program, and I've gotten good reports from their parents. I have a little boy that's in kindergarten. He's reading on 2nd grade level. I have another student that's gone to 1st grade. When he came in, he was just at 12 months old, and I told his mother the first week, he'll be an architect. That boy could build some stuff. He could build some stuff. His first year in pre-K, he won the architect award. So it's like, these kids are like, when I say these kids are on top of things when they leave my program, I'm not just watching kids. I don't watch kids. I don't sit on them. I'm not a babysitter. So, I am an early childhood educator. I've got the education to do it. I have the heart to do it. And that's what I plan to do. But I would like some help from my state.
Haley, briefly, any final thoughts?
Yes, I just want to say that the fact that early childhood education is an emerging topic is an emerging topic. And so let's keep this momentum going.
We've got a few minutes that we could take a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah, I pointed that out to her earlier.
It's a part-time, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's that part-time job and it pays so well.
Any questions? If not, Lieutenant Governor Hunt, we will turn it over to you.
Let's give everyone a thank you. Gonna take half an hour for lunch.
that you can make, you know, come at it that way.
Reach out, see if I have any contacts that might be.
The meeting with,
We can have two extra things.
Know something that we're. Yeah, I know.
to go over our PD needs again. And, I mean, we were. Not for yeah. I'm so sorry.
I asked Ken.
I mean, I was talking,
Back of your hands. And then I'm trying to be cheap because I came out really big pretty one. Like next to the group. Real tough.
No announcement yet.
Some of the other ones are just like, ew, just here. The family trucker. Yeah, that's.
No announcements been made on the one.
No.
It's the one that's actively doing exercise every year.
You like
So bad. Real bad for the kids. They're gonna be so. The year I graduated high school, the next year they started coming to NFL Live. Like 2000. Receiving a lot of assurance for the last couple of years. Oh my gosh. I graduated in 97. I'll get everything that year. We're all excited. Yeah.
As if it just applies.
I remember getting my age at 16 that year. Yeah.
I don't wanna be.
I said, I could nail last night. Did you put this thing in the first one? Okay, great. I mean, that doesn't do this money. They have a control group. It does. Yeah. They all have access to the practice sessions and all that, but only a certain group. And I watched, the other day when I was at MD. It was just so smudgy. He's in my opinion, Josh really got to get his full license. And then I, in my opinion, when I came back, I think with the control group, I know it was rising. That's the way it was the first time.
Half track, I get.
Okay. Yeah, you were in the community practice stations and all that. I mean, it was, I think, what they were trying.
Only getting resources.
They were only getting access to additional groups. They weren't getting.
It's just so fun, so
excited.
excited.
When he left, they called that control. Sometimes I mean, you know, that's the way they did it the first time. They had a control group. Typically, whatever this group did. I can research.
necessarily always cover the related services, therapies, and the nurses that children may need. The other thing I would point out is that we've had parents reach out to us, like when we had a program close in Anderson County, the only one they have, right? So when you have small counties lose their developmental day programs, what you have is parents that either have to leave the workforce, they have to stay home, or they have to move, because you can't just pick your child up and send them to a typical program, right? You have special needs. And so as we're looking and talking about recommendations for the future moving on, and we're talking about statewide boards, we should also be looking at multipliers for our development.
And I'll just add, I believe that we only 3 developmental day childcare centers in Wake County. And so if you think about the sheer size of Wake County to only have 3, then we're talking about a pretty small population of centers for a large population of people that need it.
It sounds like we have 153. I just looked it up for us. 153.
We had 14 closed.
In this state? In this state. We had 14 plus.
Thank you. All right. Something else to think about. I'd like to welcome Samantha Cole, who is going to help facilitate today's work session. These exercises will help us identify interim recommendations for the preliminary report that's due the end of this week. I want to remind the task force members that Executive Order 10 charges the task force to examine opportunities, barriers, and policy solutions to expand the supply of accessible, affordable, high-quality childcare and early education options for working families with young children in North Carolina. So Samantha, take it away.
Thank you all. I really just want to reiterate that everyone here has already put in a tremendous amount of work toward getting us to the place where we can set upon, deliver, and produce some recommendations that are going to be included in June's report. It is one of our key directives, but the good news whenever you're endeavoring on a project like this is that you're already well underway. A lot of ideas have already been generated from these discussions the past 2 months, so thank you for diving in on that, for your leadership and for your thoughts. Like the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, one of our key objectives for today is make sure that we walk away to the extent possible. I hope we can get there. I believe we can get there with roughly 3 to 5 interim recommendations that can be attached to the interim report that's going to be due to the governor's office on June 30th. That is something we've been working on as staff, and again, something that you all have been driving at for quite some time now. So I have a little bit to talk about with respect to a plan of action today. Before I get into that, I just want to kind of share a couple of bits of context. So first of all, the potential recommendations that you all are going to be looking at today are things that we have staff have pulled together based on some of the ideas that you all have already previously generated. So they're things that you all have come up with, that you have surfaced, that you have reflected on, that you have told us at some point in the past couple of months, in many cases, multiple points in the past couple of months matter to you and you believe are really part of the driving force of the work that we're doing here. We're intending today to reflect some of those things back to you and allow everybody to consider whether or not those would be appropriate to add on a list of recommendations for our report. Those are going to be tracked into the 3 work areas that we've also identified for working groups. So those are going to be tracked into childcare finance and funding, childcare for the public sector workforce, and workforce compensation and sports topics specifically. We're going to ask, of course, that everyone here participate in one of those working groups in coming weeks, and helping you all kind of identify which one you'd like to be sorted into. And something I really want to make sure everybody here understands is if there's an idea on your list, or if there's an idea that you don't see reflected on your list, that doesn't mean that it isn't going to be a significant portion of our work moving forward. I just want to remind everyone we can carry that into the deeper work that working groups are going to be leading moving forward. So just to kind of walk you all through how we're going to begin going through the process of surfacing those recommendations. We're going to work in 3 small groups first. Well, I guess we'll do some large group activity first, but we'll work in 3 small groups aligned with those categories that I mentioned to dig deeper into some of these concepts. We're going to really kind of show you guys some of those initial recommendations here in just a minute to make sure that nobody has any
burning feelings that things are missing from those three lists. And then we're gonna separate everyone out into small groups for a period of about 20 minutes. Everybody's gonna have a dedicated staff member with you. Group 1, which is gonna be focused on finance and funding, is gonna stay in this room, and groups 2 and 3 are gonna go into room 240. We can show you what your assignments are. We've, for the sake of expediency, already sorted everyone into those 3 groups for today, but the number group that you're on is gonna be inside your name card here on the table. If everyone wants to look at that and take a look at it in a minute, we can get down to work. But we're gonna do small group work, evaluating those potential ideas for about 20 minutes. We're gonna come back together, give everyone about 15 minutes to share out what those outcomes are. If there are really any outcomes suggesting, okay, one of these 3 things on this list feels like it's really important to us, there's consensus among the small group that we'd like to see it rise to be included in a larger list, then we'll do that. If there are other reflections related to something that's missing or whatever it is, you're welcome to share those as well. We're gonna take a little break and let staff visualize for you roughly 9 or however many ideas are remaining at the end of that time. And then we're gonna give everybody some time to evaluate and basically share what your preferences are. Again, for as many as 5 of those ideas as we have with stickers that we're going to give you. And then we're gonna have a broader conversation as a big group about how that feels. Like ultimately, if we have a set of 5 or fewer, or maybe a little more than that, that seem overwhelmingly popular or overwhelmingly supported by the group to make it into this report, we'll make sure that there's a discussion about that so that we can hopefully leave here today with some clarity. We also are gonna have instructions and guiding questions for everyone to work through as you're evaluating these 3 big ideas. Those are gonna be with you. Your dedicated staff member has them. There are also some worksheets where you all can make some notes, add some bullet points about concepts like, if we were to pursue this idea, who would be taking the lead on it? Is it feasible? Do we feel like it's possible? Any other big points of consideration to make, so please bring a writing utensil with you if you can. And always feel free to ask your staff member if you have any questions about that. Does anyone have any questions about the process before we move forward and take a look at the list? So here's our list of 9 potential recommendations that again reflect what has surfaced so far from a lot of your work and your feedback over the past couple of months. You're of course free to take a snapshot of this if you want to, but we're gonna also have these in your small groups. So I'll leave a little space. Does anybody have some preliminary reactions to this? We've got about 5 minutes protected for folks to have a broad group conversation about this. Any questions, thoughts, things that feel completely missing? Here are your group assignments. Again, those are reflected, they should be reflected in the numbers on the inside of your tabletop cards. Group 1 can stay here. Groups 2 and 3 are gonna go into 240. And we'll see you back here in about 20 minutes.
Okay, group where? Whichever. You stay here.
How are you liking your new job?
I love it.
Want to be good? That's what I wish I said. I'm like, please be the
I'm sorry, I had to put those like.
All right.
Right. That's fine, I'm ready.
All right. I like that. Would y'all?
Yeah.
Here's like Sam busy.
Me too. Going down to that end.
You get to work.
I'm here 2 days a week. 2 days a week at where? It's at the Dillon, is that?
Oh, okay.
That's a couple of them. They moved this up. Really?
That's okay, but I love seeing you around the last time.
I mean, I'm change it, but
That.
I mean,
I get it.
yeah. I get. Certainly not what I was looking for.
It does seem like. I just want to be a whole category, so I can do it now or I can.
See you.
That's what past I had, but
It was.
All right. Can you all clear each other or do we need?
Oh, I aim on the high class.
All right.
first time ever I've seen that. I was like, the air fryer. Air fryer. He opened up the drawer. He said, "Oh yeah, it got a little easy in here." He said, "I probably need to change the paneling or whatever." I said, "Yeah." The non-stick top.
Yeah, what is
That's I use it all. And I'm even I want to have.
That was already.
Looks like a coffee cup in your air fryer thing. I don't know what I did, but it's.
That's part of what we're doing. Let's do something. Here, I got it. All right, now we're ready. Now we're ready.
All right. Here, I'll grab your chair.
Whatever you talk about.
All right, y'all. So as Samantha said, we did not want to have a blank slate for y'all, so we tried to reflect in the financing category some of the top ideas that have risen to the surface. Again, these are by no means the only ideas that would move the ball forward for childcare financing and funding, but a starting point that we wanted to hear from you all. I will go ahead and open it up to the group to see, since we didn't have as much time with the larger group. Are there any burning things in this topic that are not reflected here that any of these group members feel are important to be part of our discussion as we're evaluating the potential recommendation around financing and funding that's not here. So right now we have explore financial supports to build or start up new childcare centers or homes, and y'all's comments that came up as things like grants for new or aspiring or even existing childcare providers. Second, increase small business support for aspiring and continuing childcare operators that showed up as things like training, business training, like I heard from Neil earlier today. Any number of other supports they might need to keep their business going. And then third, we also heard several comments around creating a statewide floor for childcare subsidy reimbursement rates. So I'll pause there and just open it up to see, are there any other big ideas that are worth putting on consideration in our list of finance and budget?
I would like to formally just say the adding flyer for our CDCC, so our Certified Developmental Day.
Would that be kind of part of the statewide?
In
floor?
addition to.
In addition to. And I will say, part of what we're doing as a small group is trying to, these are starting point ideas. What we're hoping is we spend our time refining them, evaluating them, so we can certainly modify, as you're saying, make some tweaks, changes, even specify, drill down further. So say it one more time, Candace.
Adding a multiplier.
LTO
or development day.
Any others?
There's two, I know we talked a lot about, and it's sort of, I guess on the side, talking about small business support, existing childcare offerings. We've also had a lot of conversations about bringing mid to large size businesses into the childcare providing space. So if you have, not all gonna be the SaaS model by any stretch, but I'm just saying, even larger factories, those kind of things, the consideration of what are the incentives to them to offer on-site childcare for hospitals, for others that can also more closely meet workforce needs. You could say that, you know, opening in my area, opening in Asheville, a new childcare center is one thing, but how well that's gonna serve nurses who are working flex shifts and those kind of things may be a whole different matter compared to something a hospital system would have. And so I think that's one. I think the other one, the floor is part of the discussion, but we talked about the rate survey. So they set market rates every 2 years based on the private pay amounts within a particular county. That's why when she was asking about Gaston County is different to Meck, because they charge more for private care in Mecklenburg than they do in Gaston. So I think there is a conversation of how do we need to adjust or utilize that formula and how do we update it? The 2023 formula's out there, we're not even there yet. And the 2025 is getting ready to come out. That's every 2 years, a new budget proposal to raise the rates to the new market floor. And sometimes in that conversation, and when I say change formula, sometimes in that conversation, there's winners and losers. Depending on how you did between the 23 and the 25. And some counties are having downward pressures where they can't charge private as much as they could. It may not matter if you had the floor, but if you're not at the floor, it could matter in that kind of conversation. So I think it's one to update that for represent the cost of providing childcare than to update it to say what is being charged for the private, because we know there's this new margin.
One of the things that we haven't talked about is, and I'm gonna look over at Candace and hope she's gonna save me in about a minute. DCDU did a study to look at what an alternative market rate structure would be. And what it looks at is the cost of providing the care versus the cost for the market rate. I don't want anyone to hate me in a minute because it is an astronomical price. But I do think it's worth, if we're having this conversation to kind of, Candace, I don't mean to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
but
No, you're absolutely right. So we do have a study that we already have done for the alternative market rate, which aligns us closer to the actual cost of care versus going off of market rate, which is exactly what you said, is what people can charge their families, which we know is already artificially suppressed, right? Because they can't charge parents what it actually costs them to afford it. So when we were thinking about our legislative priorities, though, the first thing we need to do is have that statewide floor for subsidy. And then I think we have a plan in there to how we increase and build upon that floor to get us to that actual cost of care with the alternative market rate. So it's like, maybe it's a 1 to however many year plan that the task force says we'd like to implement a statewide floor with the plan of increasing by this much each year until we reach the actual cost of care. And within that alternative market rate, it allows automatic adjustment for inflation, and it reassesses the rates like every 2 years.
Okay, so just to repeat back some of the things I heard, Senator Heiss, I think you're putting maybe a different flavor of one of these ideas that's about supports. I heard you say bringing mid to large businesses into the childcare space, perhaps through some kind of incentive process with looking at our larger employers and companies. Candace, heard you say that adding a multiplier for developmental day. And then there's a few different strands here around the rates, the adjusting the formula, getting to an alternative market rate. I do want to move us into actually evaluating these and the goal with our, you have one? Okay, all right, let's hear it. Because we want to try to narrow down.
I've got
the three.
two.
Okay.
Building off of Senator Heiss's sort of public-private partnership. So Iowa's doing this really cool thing where they got businesses to invest rather than like the TriShare model, which is, you know, it's pretty slow on the uptake because it's kind of a per employee benefit.
Right.
In Iowa, like they got like John Deere tractor and a whole bunch of businesses to invest in a pooled fund that is then used for the workforce. And then the state put in money to it and then it's administered. So it's literally money to pay the childcare workforce more. And businesses are just pooling their funds because they found the biggest limiting factor for childcare was teachers. And so so I would just offer that I think there would be a way to incentivize that. And then Senator Bergen, I thought, was talking about a cool idea that another state actually just passed legislation on, which is to take one-time money and private money and put it into a fund. And that becomes an endowment fund and then use the money.
That's kind of what number one.
Is that number one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And your other one, I think, goes under workforce compensation.
I think that's too.
The pool.
Yeah. Or the-
And I'm sorry, I do have one more.
Okay.
Probably I can return the favor for Erica, because we were just talking about it with the provider, Dan, he suggested it. It was about property taxes. And I think Erica, you said they do something like that in Texas where they write off or they're waived from having to pay the property taxes programs are.
and don't hold me to any of this because I want to double check myself on both the state and what specific policy says. But my understanding from months ago is that Texas has it written in statute that childcare centers are not subject to property tax. So they kind of have that additional incentive. Now, also noting, I think Texas's overall tax structure is different than North Carolina's. Substantially it is. So I don't, again, I'm not but I do, I mean, it is something that another state has looked at. And I don't think Texas is the only one. I put in my mouth about trying.
And yeah, then the question there is the hold harmless question for the counties. That would be Lisa.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's
Yeah.
And I think his point was if there could be language to make it optional, because his county was willing to waive it for him, but they said that they needed permission from the state to be able to do it.
May require more.
Yeah.
May require a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, that would be
huge. Because it's the highest best use value of the property. We generally haven't got into letting county commissioners arbitrarily decide. What they charge for them, but that would be a staff question I could answer, but I do think it may run afoul of our constitutional requirements for taxation. But those that are nonprofits can fall into that.
Yes.
They can get an exemption now if they're a nonprofit entity or nonprofit organization now.
Okay, so we have more than 3 ideas, so I want to challenge you all to see, are there ways that you think some of these might be combined? Are there ones that are really speaking to folks as like, this feels like it really should be put forward and flesh out what might that look like?
As the person who started talking about a massively different rate structure, I just want to actually say my very, very strong opinion is that the statewide floor for a childcare subsidy rates would have the greatest impact in the short term to get us on more stable footing. Obviously, I don't think it's an overall solution to the bigger problem. I do think that it would, based on everything we've talked about and what all the numbers say, it would be the biggest thing that we can do sort of right now to have that impact. I also think that if not getting to the statewide floor, I mean, Senate Bill 412, where we'd have a 10% bump on rural counties, and if I get this wrong, please interject, 10% bump for rural counties, it's not gonna get us where the statewide floor would get us, but it gets a whole lot closer. And folks like Haley Hartley, that were on there, like they're the kind of communities that are gonna get benefited. So to me, I think the most bang for our buck is addressing that first.
Ideally, you could do both. I just would, it's not that it's not the recommendation in others. Here's the challenge. About half the people in the state live in the county above the state floor. About half live in the county below the state floor. Put in the state floor, that's coming in, the same amount of money in the pool. So we will take slots away from counties who are above the floor to provide fewer slots overall for the counties who are above the floor, raising their rates, so the amount of money in the pool is the same. That's what coming in, and that's part of the challenge you have in getting it through is when you're trying to rebalance things. I've got to go to members who now have fewer slots in their county so that we can pay more for existing slots in others. When I've got to get
You're picking winners
that,
and
right,
losers.
I've got to get, 72 in one chamber and 30 in the other to get across the fish side. That's been kind of the challenge of putting that out there. Everybody picks a sheet up and says, what did this do to my district, my county, for those kind of things. And so that doesn't mean I don't think it's not the right thing to do. But I think I just want to put that out there kind of for all the recommendations. The other I say is be careful of any recommendation somebody just reads and says this is more money for doing the exact same thing, because it's not going to get prioritized. Put it out, but I do the floor, and then I did birth to 2 was 10% as well. So
And both budgets have some rise in subsidy, right?
Yes.
So that's perfect.
Does it just mean
We
less
can work it out.
slots, or, so you're not really literally taking money away from a childcare program per slot, you're just having less slots?
no, but I would say Mecklenburg in general would probably have a significant 10% reduction in slots.
Neck and Wake.
Wake's a little different from where its rates are compared to the reimbursements, but I wouldn't have more detail than that, but I know Charlotte will be much higher above the Wake is.
The idea of having a pool of money that, we could get from a private group, which somebody has come forward to offer money for 5 years, significant amount. And use that, as Senator Berg was talking about, with people sending in proposals to get, things funded, especially starting up places.
Would you say it's to build / start or renovate? I mean, there might be childcare centers that need to bring some things up to
I would say
standard.
And I think this is also a conversation, we need a conversation somewhere with the banking industry.
Yep. Great.
Why is it a childcare center? I mean, if it's as simple as there's a they have a margin of 0.4%, as when we presented here. Like, I don't know that there's a lending solution that says anyone should get in the market in an industry, loaning money to an industry that has less than a, 1% margin. I mean, that's how you lose money. And to say what's the problem. But if there are other factors in, like, how are centers valued for the purpose of this? What are things we could even look at, like we've done with the Housing Finance Agency, or we've done with the federal government did with VA loans and others that kind of put us in that market instead of saying, we're just gonna set up a fund that's gonna loan out money in a banking industry that we're not in as the state or others. Like, how do we create those? Is there a potential for stop losses for loans on particular centers that qualify and are placed in certain areas, that we do a reinsurance policy or those kind of things to guarantee the bank the assets would be covered for their losses? Is it an insurance program that would do that?
I'm not sure. I sit on the SBTDC advisory board. I don't know if there's anything. If you go to a bank, you get one set, but if you go to SBTDC with the Small Business Administration, there's an entirely different way of looking at that. So maybe the partnership is with the SBTDC in some capacity.
I mean, there's gap insurance on new cars, it's going down, but something will cover it.
What you said about the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, I think looking at what some of their programs are, because they have a bunch of different loan types of programs for various supportive housing developments for both nonprofits and for-profits. And if you're a nonprofit, you have to meet certain requirements. If you're a for-profit, you have to meet certain requirements. But I think looking at that as a model for how, and their loans are structured in ways that make it very easy for organizations to figure out how they're gonna afford the loan.
So, Lieutenant Governor, I want to go to where you had been leaning into Senator Bergen's idea, the one-time plus private money. Can you say a little bit more, or anybody, about what might that look like?
Well, what I've seen a couple of states do is use one time, because it's always one time or recurring money. So take one-time money and put it into a fund. You can do it as a challenge grant with private foundations and companies, and get them to put it in a fund if you were really clear about what you're using it for, new slots, for whatever. But that is the way it works. It's either it's just state money, one-time money, or it's state and private combo money put into a fund that then they use interest for.
How does that money actually get tapped into?
And Mika was involved with this too, so.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's an opportunity to do just what you said, and I think what I liked hearing is about the business community being part of that. So when I see this first recommendation, loosely written around explore financial supports, I'd like to see a little bit more specificity around that, like to include banking perhaps, or even, but definitely the business community. I think private philanthropy would definitely be more inclined to work with the business community in communities to set up more access in place and a place-based action.
You almost need to pull in like a small little representation of the philanthropic partners and the banking and pull them together and say, here's what, give them the framework, right? Like, here's what we're trying to do. And then they talk about what could be possible from what they have to offer.
I like that. What is this idea called? Heard endowment. I heard
that's just what they call it, an endowment fund, a child care endowment fund. That's what I've heard it called.
I think there's some examples of that in Oklahoma as well. I have to look to see particularly what that paid for, but I like the terminology. It sounds right.
And that keeps it out of the state, having to be passed through the legislature and things like that. And also it allows buy-in for businesses, which, that's what we hear y'all want. And that's, so it's time to, put your money where your mouth is kind of thing.
Is there any aspect of, so I think I hear some coalescing around this idea of a child care endowment. I do want to kind of dig back into subsidy rate floor and kind of where is the group feeling on that? You know, I think, Eric, I hear you saying from an impact standpoint, probably pretty high. Resource standpoint, also high.
Winners and losers.
Winners and
That's
losers,
a
you
big
know.
deal.
Yeah, I think if you combined it with some thoughtful regulatory reforms, that could provide some resources that are not compromising anything. If you look at current programs and are we spending every dollar as well as we can spend it, that would give the senator and some folks some additional reasons to talk about. Because instead of just saying we need more, if you need more, but you're getting 2/3 of it from efficiency, modernization, and regulatory reforms that maybe we haven't looked at in a little while. You know, fraud and abuse is always something to take a look at too, in every system, like the best intentions, there's some of that going on. So to be into take the gap that the senator's talking about and shrink it in combination. So if you look at that and you want to increase it, you got to put it in combination with something to minimize the gap to allow people to be able to see through it.
I think we've dabbled in them a while, the efficiencies, others. There are children that are probably billed for certain or childcare services that are to the state and to the feds that are never in childcare services. It's one of the, how do you get that? And they came up with this really awkward card system a couple years ago, trying to fix that didn't work for anybody, but it, you know, it's one of those things that are still, I mean, it still happens. The other is while they may technically be showing up, you know, we don't inspect these every day and those type of things. Children may not be receiving services we are paying for them to receive, you know, without those are kind of the fraud, you know, where are the fraud and efficiencies, but we take away from these businesses intentionally most of the things that other businesses could utilize to reduce cost. Like we have, how many people, that was on the back of that sheet, how many people have to be in every classroom for every size of student? Most other businesses will be able to say, oh, well, we'll have 9 students in there with 2 others, and we kind of take that away and we do a lot of that too. Like there's not a lot of what kind of fence you have, what the fence has to block, what the everything else. Those aren't options business. Oh, I've got a cheaper fence that would, you know, do these kind of things, even to the height of, those are maybe a $3,000 changing table isn't what we need within their business and others, but somebody told them they needed it. So I'd love to go through those kind of things with what can actually be there. And talk about, you know, how do we remove even some regulations on these businesses that aren't producing outcomes that we want them to.
So some of the things I'm hearing that have come up, rate floor plus some thoughtful analysis of how do we mitigate the gap or extra cost that's gonna add housing finance model for childcare. Do you want to say a little bit more around that? Anything?
I mean, I just think we have to look at what the Housing Finance Agency has several, but they have grant programs and they have loan programs. And a lot of times the loan programs are structured as 20 or 30-year interest-free payment deferred loans. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily, because that's ends up being the state's business. Certainly the loan can be called at any time. So you might want to set up something a little bit different than the structure that they have, but they have a number of different products that give them some flexibility on how they support individuals, families, or organizations that are trying to get housing or provide housing. And so I think you kind of look at that structure and say, how could we do that same thing or something similar for childcare?
Okay, and then we also had good discussion around this childcare endowment idea with a combination of bringing business, banking, philanthropy, and state having some input and financial stake. Is there anything else around this kind of exploring ways to offer business support and training? We've talked a little bit about through your idea how we can offer financial support, but is there anything to put forward that's really around this idea of how do we help some of the business acumen that's needed for providers to, we heard Neil talk about kind of the difference that a MEC provider who went through training, how much more they could take it to them. Haley talking about accessing private capital. Is there anything there that you all could see moving the ball forward meaningfully? Sorry.
All right. I was waiting because I thought you were gonna say something too. We have grants right now for family childcare homes to help with businesses, but I think what we offer is optional for centers to participate in. So it will require, if we really want to see what we think we might see from people going through the programs, it would have to be mandated. And I don't know that that matches with when you're talking about deregulating for efficiency. But if we know that there is value in taking some serious business supports and classes that we know will help their business to kind of stay afloat better, then we could put something out there that says they need to go through this course.
Trying to get what I'd like to know, I guess, and I wonder what the tax implications are for a business in childcare. So if you have employees and you subsidize a slot, is that fully expensable as a compensation when you don't offer it to all your employees, you offer it to select employees? If they operate a child center, I think that's probably the easiest, then that would be a simple expense. But when there are multiple businesses trying to support a child care center that's not under their business umbrella,
It gets complicated.
it gets complicated. And at some point, if you want to really get into large business investment, you have to move out of the charitable side. That's the side where they're gonna decide before the year begins how much you're going, and you can compete for that, and they're going to do that. But if you can incorporate it into their business model, their employee retention, where they feel like they're actually making revenue off of those investments, sky's the limit on what they would put into it, is because they're seeing a return on all those. And I'd like to have a sense of how our tax system, allows that.
At least an identification of barriers to it. If they exist statutorily.
Yes, a 2,000 employee manufacturing center could open its own. 25 working at a particular industry and business, there's probably no way they would ever open their own center, those kind of things. That doesn't mean their local chamber couldn't operate one from investments from 20 of those businesses. But I don't know what are the barriers for those kind of things occurring.
Is it, I wouldn't think there is, but I wouldn't know. Is there any statutory barrier to companies pooling lives like they do for insurance, for childcare service?
I don't think there's any, I would be shocked if there's any statutory that prohibits them from doing it. The question is, what is their benefit and how can they write that as a direct expense for their employees or those kind of things in theirs? And if it's capital, I know they're changing all that at the federal. So if they're building one, how do they handle depreciation of that and those kind of things when it's not their facility?
So do you mean so some of the smaller companies I see, what they do is they just say, the benefit that I'm gonna give you is access to online search for childcare and vacancy checks, and then I'm gonna make a flat payment to you for just like you might for another benefit. So you can get, if you've got a child, you can get $200 a month or something as a flat payment. And then the question is what tax write-off might they have for that if they did it that way?
And does that have to be taxed to the employee? Does that have to be all those kind of things? Because is that compensation now? Is that,
right?
Those are the kind of things it's kind of hitting on versus they run their own. There's no real question. I don't think you would get a separate 1099 for childcare if the center ran it themselves. Listed as
Well,
charged a reduced rate.
I mean, the tri-share model we have right now, I mean, how does that work as far as? Positive?
I mean, I would doubt that those families are being taxed on
Yeah,
that
that's what I doubt.
taxable benefit.
So I wonder if that could even be expanded.
The pilot, right? We have 3
Yeah, it's a
sites right now.
pilot.
The closest answer I know here, blowing up. The police do
I
not get
know.
taxed for the reduced rate.
Right.
That's also a reduced rate. and not
Right.
That's how it's.
Yeah,
Specific
Yeah.
compensation.
which, I mean, is that a model other places could use?
It is, love Boyne Rock,
Yeah.
whatever else, realize they have a huge population that owns property that are
Yes.
there to visit.
Yes.
That's with coming in, they, it's not an option most of the other towns across my district could consider. I mean, most of them can't even hire a fire, worried about retention, they're all volunteer fire
Right.
departments throughout the whole rest of the district, and they have 20-some firefighters in the town.
I think we're gonna have to wrap up
Okay.
soon.
Sorry.
Top 3 I'm hearing from the
Okay.
group are childcare development idea. So Susan, I would ask if you could speak to that. 2, the childcare finance model. You speak to that? Yep, and then 3, rate floor and kind of the discussion we had around it. Would you be able to speak to that? Yeah. All right, thanks y'all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Taylor.
Taylor Petite, because I know you like to.
Good. I think. So I didn't know how to change. No one else is didn't do nothing. Well. They don't know at all.
I'm gonna have to have a CMS in right now.
Like reading for sure.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah.
Nobody was, yeah, you're right.
I'm just gonna ask you about open session now.
15 minutes for everybody to share their.
Talk to you about it.
How are you?
Just a minute.
Oh, yeah, my own.
To meet them at so, like.
Oh.
Got that. I did.
What no?
Oh.
How many of us out of her?
A couple questions I have.
Yeah, it's
They managed to. You know,
It's good to see you in person.
If we could take 15 minutes, we're gonna take a break after that. You take 15 minutes, 5 minutes for a small group to tell everybody else about our progress. Does group one wanna get started? I understand 3 of you are gonna share.
Yep, we'll have Susan, and Sarah, and then Erica to touch on our 3 ideas.
Am I, oh. Well, hello, everybody. This is, all of y'all and Senator Bergen's brilliant idea. We talked about, creating an endowment fund. There are a number of states, there are a few states that have done this that can be both a combination of state one-time appropriations that establish a new fund and/or private business dollars. Or it could be like a challenge grant, like a match grant between public and private. But basically to establish an endowment fund so that you're then spending money from the interest of that fund in an ongoing way towards development of new slots or however you want to spend the money on childcare. But it's a great way of taking one-time money, one-time investment, and it becoming a longer term source of funding. Yes, sir. Ron?
Some of the original conversation,
Oh.
no government.
Okay.
This is trying to get groups, lawyers, everybody to come up with a fund. It can be used, not recurring dollars, as we say in the budget process, non-recurring dollars, right? But something to start out. Yeah, right now, I don't think waiting for the state or federal to help us is going to help. So this would be to put together a large sum of money to promote existing childcare and new childcare where needed.
You might have added government.
Explore.
How was that exploration going? Here somewhere. It's already been used twice.
Yes. Oh, me? Yes. Okay, well, explore. So one of the ideas that came up kind of along with how do we think about how to jumpstart childcare centers, either new or provide some renovation funds, is to look at a model similar to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. So explore, gentlemen, ways to do that. But North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has a number of products, if you will, grants and loans for both individuals as well as organizations who are either trying to get housing or build housing, affordable housing. And this would be kind of in the similar vein. How could you do that and set up loan program or grant programs for childcare centers for one-time funding to help them build their center or renovate their center. And some of these loans are, they're financed at a 20 or 30-year interest-free, payment deferred option. You might not want to do it that way, but you could look at different models that they have used to do something similar
Yeah.
Erica?
The third thing that we talked about is to
I'm nervous to say this now, create a statewide subsidy for reimbursement rates. And the reason for this is because we know that the current subsidy rates are not where they would need to be for most of our providers to be able to provide services, stay business and balance those budget sheets that we were looking at earlier. And one of the things that we know is that we have massive childcare deserts, particularly in a lot of our rural areas of our state. And those areas are all being compensated with subsidies that are lower than what a statewide subsidy floor rate would put them at. And so if we were to set in place a statewide subsidy rate, what we would do is create more parity across county lines. We have some areas where we have $700 differences between the cost of care in one county or between the subsidy rate in one county and the subsidy rate 5 miles down the road. We also know that in areas like Haley Hartley, as she was talking about Watauga County, talking about having to have that $300 fee on top of that subsidy rate, we know that Watauga County, for example, is one of those, half of our counties that would be benefited by the subsidy floor. We did acknowledge that there is, one negative is that there feels like winners and losers where some counties would not benefit from the subsidy rate. We do know it would benefit most of the counties, or disproportionately benefit those counties that have childcare, or more likely to have childcare deserts.
Group one. Group two.
Daniel, thanks for facilitating a great conversation. Feel free to jump in anywhere here. I took notes, so I was tapped to report on behalf of group two. But as we look at the recommendations from the chart, we thought that the first recommendation was great, and some strategies that we might focus on to accomplish this are really taking an inventory of which community colleges and universities within the UNC system are deploying solutions related to childcare, and making sure that we are aware of what's effective and what already exists. There are great existing community colleges that have Head Start partnerships, Lifespan partnerships. Some colleges are offering backup care, which is really wonderful. And we talked about the need to have some community colleges or anywhere offer sick care as an option as well. And we also talked about how education is oftentimes, or school systems or universities are oftentimes the leading employers in many counties. And so if we can really focus in on our community colleges and universities within the UNC system, we would be able to reach a lot of families. So we definitely want to keep that one and advance it. I'll skip the second one. We talked a lot about exploring the use of underutilized public property for childcare as well. Amar and our group shared that corrections and nurses and engineers are the most vacant state government positions now. And so if we can focus on correctional facilities in counties with the highest vacancy rate, and also look at which buildings have certain vacancies, that could be an effective solution, so that we don't have to buy new buildings to establish new childcare centers. And perhaps we could look to the FlexPEC solution that we learned about when the task force, I think, had the first meeting. And perhaps there's a way to look at vacant buildings and see, like schools, if there's a way to offer several childcare options in one facility to reach more families. And for our third one, we thought that this study public sector employers piece is really a strategy that we should use as it relates to any recommendations that the task force puts forward, and it doesn't really need to stand alone as its own recommendation. We want to continue to study best practices like we've been doing, but we don't think it needs a separate call out in the report. Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah.
My group. Senator, would you like to share?
Sure. So we didn't have the fancy sticky pads, so we just kind of went off the paper. The first part was link existing services to a continuum of training and support for early care and education workforce. Part of what we talked about, again, going back to the the no new funding model, was to take the apprenticeship work that we've got out there right now and some of the existing workforce through like My Future NC, some of the apprenticeship NC apprenticeship programs, some of the things that we're doing in this year's session as well, and looking at what we can do with high school students specifically in creating more pathways while students are in high school, taking advantage of CCP tracks, early childhood pathways, being able to expand that to all high schools across the state, partnering with our community college system. They wouldn't necessarily have to go through the Accelerated Child Care Academy program. They could go through a regular semester-long EDU 119 and then straight into the workforce, or even in the workforce as an apprenticeship while they're still in high school. I know in the past, we'd had some conversations around lowering the minimum age from 18 to 16 with certain parameters in there about not being unsupervised and some other security precautions, but allowing students who are interested in the field to go directly to work and then helping shorten some of the workforce gap that we've got right now. We thought that would be a really interesting approach to go after it, and it really wouldn't cost any more money or wouldn't take up the teach scholarships or the money that we've got for other students out there as well. So it could be a win-win. And then there was discussion in that same line of thought around advancing friends and family homes, networks, neighbors, where we've got some question around licensing, non-licensed entities out there that are doing small family homes. And so looking at it from that perspective as well, and what we can do to help grow and to expand those types of programs. The next section, explore subsidized or free childcare to childcare workers. Obviously, I'm a big supporter of this. We've run the bill 2 terms consecutively now, and which would put teachers at the front end of the subsidy line. So the automatic qualification for subsidy for teachers with childcare age children. I think this is the biggest thing that we can do in terms of a workforce perspective. Obviously, there's implications on other folks maybe already on the subsidy list, but we've got places where we know we've got children who would qualify for subsidy, but we don't have classrooms because we have the teachers. And so, to me, the balance is worth taking a chance and looking at this, and maybe even if we don't go full statewide, but maybe start at a tier level and start with our rural smallest counties, those hardest to fill. Maybe we start looking at those first, then work our way towards a statewide model. But I think that would be the biggest way for us to go after a large number of teachers, take some of the emphasis off of our providers out there, some of the financial restraints that we've got today with that, and really help stabilize some of the workforce there for those folks. Then the last piece, really developing approaches to offer non-salary benefits to childcare professionals, insurance, retirement, so forth. We've been kicking this idea around for a few years. I don't know if there's anybody in the room that has the legal perspective on this, but looking at how we make teachers who are in early childhood eligible for the state employees health insurance. I know if we've got an NC pre-K program at a public school in your county, those teachers are eligible. They're on the insurance or have access to it. If you hire somebody in NC pre-K program and they go to a for-profit center down the street, they're not eligible. So how do we bridge that gap? Would be the first way to do that. And then is there another way that then, if we can do that, then how do we make the other teachers at that center eligible to buy in? Maybe the state's not fully subsidizing it. Maybe it's a buy-in option for those employers. But the ability to have access, it would be much cheaper than any of the private or exchange rates that they're getting today. And so just trying to make it affordable for the employers and the employees themselves. I know there's in the past, we've talked about some of the agency models where, we could look at like the Department of Child Development or some other child care association where people are members, they could buy in, but then you're not necessarily in that same health plan. The power and the size and the strength of the state employees, especially when we're combining that hopefully with younger workers, the cost shouldn't be astronomically more than it would be for who's looking to grow. And so I think there's maybe a win-win in there, but I think there's some federal restrictions in place today on that, and we'd have to work through, but something we would think should be explored. You think
Anybody from group 3 have anything else to add? Lori, I don't want to pick on you, but can you talk very briefly about the grant funding you told us about?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
About family child care?
Very quick synopsis. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Southwestern Child Development Commission currently has two family child care grants. Both of those will be ending, one June 30th, one early July. And part of that was developing a system so that we could increase family child care across North Carolina. And I think both of those reports will indicate kind of what we've been doing, the work that we've been doing, the technical assistance, professional development, startup grants. We've kind of figured out kind of like the sweet spot for all of that. And so that's coming really shortly. We've got some preliminary information that we're willing to share with everybody.
Thank you. I think we have time for a short break. And then whenever we get back, we're gonna be handing these out to everybody. We will have the ideas that you all just shared with us visualized around the room, and then we can let everyone demonstrate how you feel, your preferences for those suggestions so that we can hopefully narrow them down further to the list. Can we come back, Lieutenant Governor, at 2? Okay, thank you. Noticing patterns here. So some of these things look like we actually fit underneath existing ones, so like, isn't this? Yeah. Like, isn't this that? Like, if we just, you know what I'm saying? Oh. So then the next closer to 7.
Your brain is fired up.
It's on there that would find all the others. I bet you're not in here. Yeah, there's a little. Yeah. And in the end.
It's the first thing I said ours too.
That's a question, it's also a.
Understand their opportunities, you know,
Anyway, I didn't mean to tell you. The more you have that idea.
But even the
I don't know where that's going.
Think about what's sad.
Yeah. Potentially uncertainty that.
That's the same part.
Yeah, it did sound.
Yeah, I actually just read
Somebody has to help in
They got sued.
As far as systems goes, and then for me, it's all about the support.
Great thread.
It just probably feels a lot more because it's been typically.
Renata are growing a hilarious person. I've never been this before.
Here you go, I'll just show you the line.
Oh, there's, yeah, I think this is what you're.
Right? I think it kind of like, did we not do that when we
Really opened my eyes to, because I'm not a political minded person. I don't like the way I see this.
Up in about 100 miles.
Oh. Financial supports are use all 5 on right when
Yes.
on you. Stop 5 when I'm late. In just a second, but yeah, if you feel strongly, you go ahead.
Once you get used to driving on the other side, which I did not do.
Oh. So now we just put a sticker, are we limited to one sticker on one item? You don't have to people load them up, put 5 on one?
Yeah. She accepted it at the meeting. I think I was reading that like the doctors. I think we need to go.
They'll charge them. Because had no insurance. So here, your time, take this.
Think it might not.
Yeah, that happened to me while. Yeah, let's work to that. We hired in Scotland. They have insurance from Euros.
Appreciate step up to 2 days ago.
Let's restart our meeting, everyone.
All right,
Vice Chair and also change
Thank you all so much for your attention. I'm so sorry we're starting to get tight on time and we want to make sure we can wrap this thing up brief as possible. So you probably see visualized here different options. I think we're wrapping those up. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of final phase of this. So each seated task member should have a strip of 5 of these stickers. We're going to ask you to come up here and spend them however you feel called to do. by placing them on ideas that you feel belong to. You're welcome to budget these however you want. If you'd like to use all 5 stars and just one idea you feel especially passionate about, you're welcome to do that. If you want to split them up one by one and put one on 5 different ideas, you're welcome to do that too. We're going to take about 15 minutes for that exercise, and then we're going to look very quickly at what comes to the surface, and hopefully we will all our potential suggestions down to a shorter list. So are we ready, folks? Yeah, okay, great. Go ahead.
Ready for the second
Why are
group?
you so useless?
No.
You can.
Where they reported out.
Say, no, no.
Saying the teacher something he did. You gonna do it?
Put them all in one.
I did,
Yes, you can.
but where? What's missing?
I would like 5 more stickers.
Yeah.
That one, because you only picked 2. Didn't group 2 only pick 2? Yeah.
Was taking breaks.
Oh, is it? I think that's this one. Yeah, but I'll name it more specifically. It might get 2, it might come back.
Someone check.
Sarah.
May I borrow this?
Property tax percent, county sets their own property tax.
But they gotta, they have to have permission from the state. The tax director of Orange County, they said there's they wanted to get how much of this from Medicare, like a percentage of total.
One person said.
We always pass each other, but in order for us to.
I know.
I know, I was thinking. That's not through the state, right?
Yeah, you're right.
I'm gonna go back and I had a conversation.
You're like, we don't have.
I mean, private.
Oh, nice. They sent it up. He has all. Yeah. You give him 50?
You didn't get any
Conversations.
seeds.
You might want to have conversations. I have no idea. You might want to have conversations and see where they're at. I was really shocked when I heard that.
Make sure nobody.
I would put this Candace on, not that one. I don't
You know
want
she
the
will.
bull on it. I don't know what, that's the question. I have no idea. When I'm asking it, there's pretty top people in there, and they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, farming.
I am gonna ask them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the one I sat down.
Out.
I can't afford it all. A lot of these programs you on a regular basis.
You put it in. So does this, is that count? Where's the center like?
Trying to vote for bacon about it.
What is that?
You already showed that in like.
I think it's just like that. I think it's just.
I think that is the.
Okay, maybe.
More stick. What?
Did you stack them?
Did stack a couple of them. Spread about, I did stack. I do believe it. Gotta get.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had the center where my son is, we were exploring, sit on the toilet, so that's how I learned all about that. They were exploring. One of the Easter's classes was going to be Africans. They were concerned internally about regular childcare, like teachers from infants up to 4 is what they would be getting in vacation. They were like, academy. They were mapping faster, exactly.
They wanted to be able to talk with Ernie and a bunch of folks about a development.
Yes. Public sector work. Yes, what's the one on the left that has a lot of stickers?
That one is, partnership.
I live in Durham. 16-year-old texted me. I'm like, I know people drown in Durham every year. She's like, people drown everywhere every year, Mom. And I'm like, I'm like, could you, like, I be good? She's like, I'm on my way to the lake in Cam's car now. And I'm like,
Mary's last voter.
what happens when you don't check your checks for me? So I texted her earlier and Daddy said, I think somebody said, I'm sorry.
You're amazing.
You a whole hour ago. What do you mean you didn't get
Attractive, but I'm gonna count.
I mean, it's like. Now I'm glad she has friends to go to the lake with. Brother who just. We've never had to navigate because we didn't want to get out and go anywhere.
The remnants, the ghost of the stuff.
Yeah, the attempt to make more signs.
Like, I'm glad she's going, right? Really like, I didn't think he was driving. But in my car.
Alright, Daniel, you wanna start counting?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I grew up in this country, right? I can also track from. So there was that.
Where have you been? Oh, we just.
Asheville. You were in Asheville? Yeah.
He said, I'm gonna.
You're still going.
Oh my gosh. Call my parents. Yeah. He used to play with kids. We just drive and everything was. Until we moved, when we decided we had gone as far as we wanted to drive back, well, the outlets were trying to but had a guy come out on his, shotgun, get off my property. He's gonna come and they just do plastic water bottles. They do all the chemicals. They do much more. Funny when you don't live there. When you live there, you didn't notice the smell. I go home, the headaches, all that's like all of them. That's how I would say to myself. Like your college tuition, doesn't it? I'm like, yes, it does. It smells like money, doesn't it? No, I can't. I said yesterday, not yesterday, I said
It's an Irish time.
Theirs didn't seem to be. We did. Makes perfect sense.
I saw her last down there and then I saw her. I'm going on.
We'll move it around to decide what all the quality.
I just added 2 more to that.
And I found it to say chapter.
All right. So you try to finish on it here.
I just want to make sure it wasn't. Taking, putting up a board and taking. Yeah, so the moms are always fair. And then also the translating. The idea that it should be heard on Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I'm registered, but I don't, it doesn't fit our hearing check. A lot of times,
Childcare oriented.
my job, my life. I was doing. And.
I spent time as well. I do something to get one later on down the road.
Yeah.
I would have thought. I went to college on loans and I didn't get a free ride. Came out of money. But it's just a difference. Taking her out, 18 down the road. Starting out and.
Be this right now or?
I think the goal is open up the floor and evaluate how this looks.
Okay.
Wanna just read through it?
Sure, yeah, we can, first of all, I feel really glad that there's one that made it from every quadrant, but we're working from here. So in childcare finance and funding, biggest vote getter was creating a statewide floor for childcare subsidy reimbursement rates. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. That's come up frequently. I just saw Senator High's dance. We're all very excited about that. Then we move into childcare for the public sector workforce. We were able to actually consolidate some things that looked more like action opportunities underneath of this objective. So this would be a broader exploring partnerships with North Carolina community colleges and K-12 school systems. And then under that, we could look at exploring use of underutilized public property for childcare and looking closer at divisions in state government that have higher vacancy rates for available positions. And then we have a lot of really popular ideas in workforce compensation and supports. Again, some of these were subject to some consolidation. So the first is linking existing services into kind of a continuum of training and support. Those are some of the things that we heard about in the panel in the May meeting with respect to some of the state services that are already operating. And then into that, we folded in kind of like increasing small business support for aspiring and continuing childcare operators. And that would of course include operators of family childcare homes. The subsequent one would be exploring subsidized or free childcare for childcare workers and considering adding them to childcare subsidy and making sure that that could help undergird the profession a little bit. And then finally, this is also very popular, developing approaches to non-salary benefits and exploring making childcare operators and childcare workers across the state eligible for benefits under the state health plan. So it's a really big list, broad, but it also drives at a lot of objectives that have come up over the past several months. Any reactions from the group? How do we feel about this coming together as a list? Yes, ma'am.
Why are there 3 in the workforce compensation, one of which got the highest at 23, and the others only have 1 each?
1 each.
I mean,
So
yeah, like, so the childcare finance and funding, I know
Oh.
there was another one that got several as well.
Yeah, I just chose the ones that had the largest number of votes across all 8 or 9 and made it to the end.
So the other ones in childcare finance were, that had less than 12, that's what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
But not far off. I think one had 11.
So what's the plan? The plan is?
The plan is, if it feels like this is something we could consider to include as our list of recommendations for the interim report, wonderful. What are the reactions to that idea?
I like it.
I also though feel strongly we should have the endowment idea in there as well.
Okay.
All right, great. I want to thank our presenters, panelists, and guests and staff for your hard work, for sharing your expertise and enriching our discussion. Members, thank you all very much for your hard work, for showing up, your dedication and service to this task force. And of course, we're all working to ensure better access to affordable, high-quality childcare. As a reminder, please look out for the poll, which you're going to rank your working group preferences, notifications of your working group assignments, and the draft of our June report, and we want your feedback. So we look forward to seeing you Monday, August 4th. Enjoy your summer. you have any summer? You all see the legislature. Thank you, everybody. It's your turn.
Can I say something real quick before we leave? Thank you all for the opportunity to be in the room, present, be heard. And I also wanted to thank Southwestern Child Development Commission, because they're part of my second job. Well, one of the two jobs that I do have, and I thank y'all so much that the money helps. And I just want to tell you, it really helps. Just wanted to open and say that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.